This is the U.S. Report with James Morrow.
Good evening and welcome to the program. It's our last show of the year, so let's go out with a bang. Coming up tonight, the House votes to approve an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden. But where will it lead? And will he keep denying involvement in his son's dodgy business dealings? We'll break that down with Outkick host Tomi Lahren shortly. Also tonight, Harvard backs its under siege President Claudine Gay after her train wreck anti-Semitism testimony has led to charges of plagiarism. We'll be discussing that fallout a little bit later in the show. Plus, check this out. Jill Biden's bizarre Christmas video that's supposed to somehow get us in the holiday spirit. I'm not so sure about that. But first, on the first day of Christmas, my true love gave to me an impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden and Hunter making an idiot of himself. That beats a partridge in a pear tree any day of the week in my book. This past Wednesday, the House of Representatives voted to push forward with a formal impeachment inquiry into Joe Biden on a strict party lines vote. And naturally, this touched off the usual denunciations from the Biden camp and its pals in the media. The New York Times set the tone for the coverage, huffing and puffing in almost every sentence of its reporting that there was no evidence of high crimes or misdemeanors. It's great reading all of this in the Times because, we all remember the amazing job they did holding their reporting on Donald Trump to that sort of high evidentiary standard. Now, in doing this, of course, the New York Times was following the lead of Democrats on Capitol Hill who were getting all the talking points out there, including claims the whole impeachment inquiry was based on zero evidence.
They have no evidence, of course, to support this inquiry, but since this majority never lets facts get in the way of a good set of Fox News talking points, here we are.
They also made the claim that this is somehow just about, Hunter's drug addiction being used against the president, who is a man of decency and integrity, if you don't mind.
And Republicans are weaponizing this addiction and using it to attack President Biden, a man of decency and integrity. Frankly, it's one of, if not the most despicable things I've seen in my whole career here in Congress.
Right. Of course, it's a matter of public record that the then vice president met with Hunter's associates from China, Mexico, Kazakhstan, Ukraine, and Russia, directly contradicting statements Biden made during his 2020 presidential campaign and while in office. In fact, despite what these guys are all saying, there is prima facie evidence of an influence peddling scheme, and that the president did benefit from it. The claims that this is somehow just about Hunter's addictions is also a nonsense, because if that was the case, well, wouldn't that bolster the idea that Hunter was indeed using his father's influence as a carrot to sell to foreign powers to fuel his expensive party lifestyle? Oh, also, speaking of Hunter, the upstanding, honorable, law-abiding citizen that he is, with skills ranging from oil and gas expert to amateur internet pornographer, well, he has refused to comply with a congressional subpoena. You see, Hunter doesn't want to testify in private. He says his testimony might be selectively leaked against him. He wants to instead grandstand in front of Congress and presumably make a big show that, in his head, believes will exonerate him. In this, I have a weird suspicion that Hunter, on some level, believes that he will cut a figure something along the lines of Michael Corleone in The Godfather Part 2. The criminal mastermind behind the family business, besting all the rubes in Congress and getting away with it. Of course, if you're familiar with the Godfather films, you also know that Hunter is more Fredo than Michael. Here's a bit of Hunter defending himself, not to Congress, but in front of Congress.
I'm here today to answer at a public hearing any legitimate questions Chairman Comer and the House Oversight Committee may have for me. I'm here today to make sure that the House Committee's illegitimate investigations of my family do not proceed on distortions, manipulated evidence, and lies.
And, according to Hunter, his father had nothing to do with any of his businesses.
Let me state as clearly as I can. My father was not financially involved in my business, not as a practicing lawyer, not as a board member of Burisma, not in my partnership with a Chinese private businessman, not in my investments at home nor abroad, and certainly not as an artist.
Interesting, because you parse the words there, and it turns out there's a lot that is left unsaid. Joe didn't have to be financially involved. All he had to do was show up to be seen to be the product Hunter was selling. And we also know that, just coincidentally, Hunter's client, Burisma, benefited from having the then Vice President tie Ukrainian aid to firing the Ukrainian prosecutor who was investigating Burisma. And we know that a Russian oligarch with ties to Hunter was mysteriously left off a sanctions list after Russia invaded Ukraine. And much, much more. Oh, and of course, this would not be a Biden family Christmas story unless we wrapped it all up in a big bow of hypocrisy. Here's Joe Biden in 2007 backing contempt citations for Republicans who refused to answer a subpoena. Subpoenaed witnesses have got to show up, he wrote. And here's Biden in 2021 talking about subpoenaed witnesses to the January 6th committee.
Your message to people who defied congressional subpoenas on the January 6th committee.
I hope that the committee goes after them and holds them accountable.
Should they be prosecuted by the Justice Department?
Yes.
There you have it. Honor the subpoena or go to jail. Unless, of course, your last name is Biden. Anyway, it should be a very Merry Christmas around the Biden family table because these investigations will be their very own Jelly of the Month Club. You know, the gift that keeps on giving. I'd say ho, 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 but Hunter might get too excited. Well, to discuss this and the rest of the week's top stories, I am joined by host of Tomi Lahren is Fearless and Fox News commentator Tomi Lahren. Tomi, let's start with this impeachment inquiry. The House voted to formalize the probe into President Biden, giving them more legal firepower to investigate. But where is this going to lead? And frankly, are Americans switched on to this, or are they more interested in the economy?
Well, they're certainly more interested in the economy, and that's something that I've been cautioning Republicans about for quite some time. While I think these investigations are certainly important, we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. Unfortunately, Republicans sometimes struggle with that. But I do think that Republicans have an appetite now to carry this thing through and to hit it home, because there's simply so much evidence here. Smoking gun after smoking gun. I mean, literally tripping over smoking guns of evidence here. You have Hunter Biden yesterday, who not only just defied precedent and defied the law, standing there brazenly saying that he's not going to submit to the subpoena and the closed-door testimony. So you've got the Biden family essentially giving the symbolic middle finger to justice. So Republicans have to carry this thing through. They still have to hit the economy. They still have to hit how unfit Joe Biden is for office. But I do believe in order to set a precedent that nobody is truly above the law, as they always like to say, I do think that they need to carry this one through and hit it home and be done with it.
Well, doesn't it, Tomi, then wind up playing into the whole narrative? We've talked about this on the show before, that there's one set of rules and laws for Democrats and the Bidens and one set of rules for Trump and everybody else. Surely that sort of strategy of saying, I'm just simply not going to listen to Congress, that's going to be really damaging to the Bidens, won't it?
Well, it should be, but I think the more you see them parading Hunter Biden around, the better it is for the Republicans and the Republican cause. I don't think that press conference, that little stunt yesterday, did Hunter Biden or the Biden family any favors whatsoever. And you've got Eric Swalwell there kind of acting like a hype man. I mean, it really is a mess. It's a circus. So that's why I do believe, although I thought in the past that maybe the impeachment inquiry would be somewhat a waste of our time politically, I do think that this is very important to set the precedent. You know, we never went after Hillary Clinton like Hillary Clinton should have been gone after. Donald Trump promised to do that. Unfortunately, he was unable. So I think now is the time to show Democrats that they are, in fact, not above the law and that Republicans have teeth and a spine, too. It's about time we show both.
Tomi, let me throw a scenario at you here. Joe Biden keeps sinking in the polls. The impeachment inquiry keeps chugging along. Something starts to come out and it starts to stink. Is that the excuse that Democrat Party leaders use to go and say, Mr. President, it's time for you to step aside so we can get somebody else in here to save our chances next November?
I'll tell you, it already stinks. So we're not waiting for it to stink. It's going to become worse and worse. It's going to be unavoidable stench. But I do believe that the Democrats are eager to get rid of Joe Biden. This might be their excuse, and Joe Biden just might bite on it. If a Hunter pardon works out in the cards for him and he can step aside, this is all going to go down, in my belief, at the convention. It's not going to be a primary situation. The time is running out on that. But I do believe you're seeing Gavin Newsom, although he's licking his wounds from that DeSantis debate a couple weeks ago, I do think you're seeing him again courting the mainstream media, the national media, going on late night TV shows. I think Gavin Newsom is ready and waiting for that stench to become unbearable, and he's ready to ride on in with his hair gel in hand.
And I think that this convention is going to be the most fascinating Democrat convention since, I think, at least 1968. But I want to move on now to this other issue, which is absolutely fascinating, the campus chaos in the U.S., and especially what's going on at Harvard, where President Claudine Gay, she had that train wreck testimony on anti-Semitism, but now she has gone and been basically caught out, according to a lot of allegations, for plagiarism, including her Ph.D. thesis. Yet Harvard is standing by her. How rotten is Harvard and the American Academy right now?
Well, it's really unfortunate because it's a top university in the entire world, and it looks very bad right now. I can't imagine what the Jewish people and Jewish students think about that university. It's appalling, even sitting here as a Christian. I can't imagine what it looks like to go to that school or to be, an alumni of that school, even to think of that school in such a high regard, which we used to. But I'll tell you this, there's a reason that UPenn got rid of Liz McGill. There's a reason that she was touchable and Claudine Gay is not. Let's be honest here. It's not going to look good for Harvard to put somebody out of a job that fits the narrative in the bill and, the box checking of a Claudine Gay. So I think no matter what comes out about her, even if she murders puppies on her spare time, I believe that she's going to be protected and shielded. And the number of faculty members in the hundreds that have come out in support of her, also appalling. There's nothing we can do about that. But I will say this to Americans that are looking at Harvard and parents that are looking at maybe spending a lot of money on that tuition bill, maybe look elsewhere, because that school doesn't stand for the things you probably wish it stood for.
Well, and, I tell you what, too, some of the cleanup efforts here that Harvard has been trying on this here after that anti-Semitism testimony, I don't know if you saw this, but Claudine Gay went to a menorah lighting and was photographed there with a tiki torch, which to me seems like a pretty interesting bit of symbolism there, given some of the controversies around that little bit of yard lighting equipment.
Oh, there's tone deaf, and then there's that. A Republican would certainly never be able to get away with this, or a conservative would never be able to get away with that. They would say that it invoked the spirit of the KKK or something like that. But, again, they're working on their optics and their visuals, but it's the snake eating its own tail here. I don't think anybody bought that phony display. And I think that her testimony, that stands alone and it stands by itself, and it's rotten to its very core. So Harvard's got a big problem on its hands. All of these elite universities, quite frankly, have problems on their hands, not just for this anti-Semitism and what's been happening in the last couple of months, but just to their very core. They seek to indoctrinate students and not educate them. So it's not going to be enough to remove a couple of presidents. You're going to have to go to the very core of these elite universities and clean house if you want some change.
Absolutely right. And yet, on this whole Gaza-Israel anti-Semitism issue, I keep getting shocked by things that I never thought I would see, like, for example, the Manhattan Bridge in New York being shut down by a group of protesters for, you guessed it, Queers for Palestine. Now, what do you make of this? Well, I would say it's a fairly self-defeating protest.
Yeah, it doesn't make a lick of sense, but leftism and wokeism in the U.S. and around the world, as we know, makes no sense. So these individuals, they call themselves Queers for Palestine, but they could be queers for climate change or queers for Occupy Wall Street or they-thems for this, that, and the other. It really doesn't matter what the cause is. These are individuals who simply want attention. These are individuals that simply want to cause trouble and mayhem and chaos, and they'll use whatever social justice movement of the day to hide under as a guise for what they really want, which is to satisfy their narcissistic itch to have somebody pay attention to them. So it makes no sense, but wokeism at its core makes no sense.
Well, exactly right. But speaking of narcissism, how narcissistic do you have to be a White House staffer whose job is to serve the U.S. president and then to hold a protest out front of the White House? This happened overnight in the U.S., and we see all of these White House staffers dressed up. Half of them are wearing masks, half of them are wearing keffiyehs, which I think is absolutely perfect. Surely, though, you can't have White House staffers going out and publicly demonstrating against the man they're working for.
Yeah, well, I have to say, I do love to see it, though, because this is another instance of the snake eating its own tail. And unfortunately, while Republicans are certainly divided, Democrats are divided as well. And I think that we can all come together in the United States under one common theme, is that we don't like the Biden administration, maybe for differing reasons. But I think it's very interesting to see the radical base of the Democrat Party speak out. That was ignited with the squad. It's not going anywhere anytime soon. They're going to have a lot of chaos on their hands. And it's going to be very interesting to see which way this Democrat Party goes. If I was a betting person, I would say probably further and further to the left.
Exactly right, Tomi Lahren. I think you've nailed it. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great Christmas, and we'll see you in 2024.
Oh, thank you very much. Merry Christmas.
And now it's time for our U.S. Report regular, former White House Chief of Staff and Senior Advisor at Bondi Partners, Mick Mulvaney. Mick, a very U.S. Report Merry Christmas to you. Thanks for coming on. Now, Congress has just passed legislation allowing the country, the U.S., to sell Virginia-class submarines to Australia under the AUKUS Security Pact. This is a landmark decision. Is the AUKUS deal now out of the woods, Mick Mulvaney?
Yeah, it is, James. So what happens is that it's passed the House today as well. So it passed the Senate yesterday. It passed the House today, and it will go to President Biden's desk. And the submarines package is part of that deal. This is a big deal. It really is. It just cements the relationship between the two countries for the next 30, 40, 50 years, maybe longer than that. Keep in mind, these things last forever. That's one of the reasons they're so important. So this was a really, really big deal. There's a bunch of other stuff in the National Defense Authorization Act, the NDAA, that's going to get a lot of attention here. But in terms of the relationship between the two countries, it doesn't get much bigger than this.
And speaking of foreign policy, too, this week we had Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky in the U.S. asking for more aid money as part of an aid package. At the same time, Congress have been trying to tie that to border policy funding. Now, take us through this. And the thing I'm curious about is why if the Ukraine war is such an existential threat, as the White House says, why don't they come to the party on also funding the border?
Because they can't bring themselves to do that. Look, the border right now is the third rail of American politics, and the Republicans are making a big deal about it. Even some Democrats are now making a big deal about it. You've got Democrat mayors in Washington, New York City, Chicago, San Francisco complaining about border policy. It's really moving to the top of the list. You would think that might make the Biden administration more likely to cut a deal, and they certainly moved a little bit in the last 24 hours. But they're not moving very much. It's very hard for a Democrat administration to do anything on border policy. It sort of goes against their DNA. So, look, this is very much up in the air. My guess is they probably cut a deal at some point in the future, but it's not going to be right away, and it might not even be before Christmas. So, again, a good contrast, perhaps, James, between the relationship that we have with Australia, where things go very, very smoothly, and the relationships we have with countries like Ukraine, where it can be pulling teeth because we just don't have that same history as we do with your country.
Yeah, but take me through a little bit more deeply on this politics of the Democrat side of things on the border, because Eric Adams has been huge on this. We've played on this program Chicago residents who would normally be voting 99% for the Democrat candidate in any election getting pretty annoyed. Surely they would be seeing, some alarm bells here, given the other polling numbers that they've got to deal with. They could lose Democrats in places where they really can't afford to.
Yeah, but they've been voting against these. These are the same policies, by the way. What's being discussed right now in Congress would be the reinstitutions of policies that existed before the Biden administration. What does that mean? They are Trump policies.
Right.
So everything you've just said is absolutely correct. But you show me a Democrat who wants to go on record voting for reinstating a Trump-era policy. That is a really hard thing for them to do, despite how much they want to give money to Ukraine.
That's absolutely wild to me. It's the great dilemma of politics there. Speaking of Trump, though, we've had more news out of the Trump trials, with the federal judge overseeing his 2020 election interference case temporarily pausing all procedural deadlines while appeals over a major issue in this play out, which could lead to the trial date being pushed back. Now, it seemed to me like there was a big push on to get this to happen just before Super Tuesday. Is that now falling apart, and does that reveal this as really being as much about politics as the law?
Yeah, it's very much falling apart right now. Yes, originally one of the cases was supposed to start on a Monday before Super Tuesday. I think it's March 4th, and Super Tuesday was March 5th. That is very much at risk. In fact, if you look at the calendar, there's a chance that none of these cases might be finished before November. There's a lot of material to go over. These appeals are very complicated. And keep in mind, there's another appeal involving a completely separate defendant. It's not getting as much attention as to whether or not the law that they're charging Trump with is even valid constitutionally. So that might have to play out before they go forward with the criminal trial of the president. So listen, did you just ask me if this was political? I think we've covered that about 700 times. Yes, this is political. It's Donald Trump. Yeah. Everything with Donald Trump is political. They really were desperate to try and get a guilty verdict before the summer, and if nothing else, before November. It looks like now both of those deadlines are at risk.
And meanwhile, Donald Trump is campaigning hard in Iowa for the Iowa caucuses. But people down here are asking me, why is he campaigning hard for this sort of thing when he's already got the nomination essentially in the bag? Or is this essentially he is now running as the candidate and is now out on the trail as the presumptive 2024 candidate?
A really good question, and here's why. There's a really good answer to it. As you know, Iowa is not a primary state. It's a caucus state. I don't think that translates into what you folks do down in Australia. What it means is people don't go to the polls and pull a ticket or a lever for a candidate. They have to go at 7 o'clock at night on a Monday night to the local gymnasium at the high school and stand around for 2 and 3 hours and make speeches about favored candidates. And then they go and they stand off to a group. Everybody that wants to vote for Donald Trump stands in one group. Everybody that wants to vote in Ron DeSantis votes for stands in another group. And if folks go home, they can change the outcome of the election. So you really have to make sure your people stay and participate through to the very end. What Trump is doing is going to these coalition rallies to get people fired up about staying in those gymnasiums until 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the morning if they have to. He doesn't want to have a mistake here in the last couple of weeks before the election, have somebody steal the election just because all the Trump people thought he had it in the bag. So this is just a smart move on his part.
The processes are so fascinating, I think, to people here in Australia. We don't have anything like that at all. It's all very bizarre down here. Finally, Mick, before I let you go, I understand you're in New York City, my old hometown, and I think you've had lunch with a certain prominent New York resident. Anything you can tell us about that?
Oh, I don't like to say this because it ruins my credibility sometimes, but I guess the reason I could talk about it is it probably ruins her credibility as well. But I had lunch today with Hillary Clinton at Columbia University. They had invited me to come and speak with Ron Klain, the chief of staff to Joe Biden in the first part of his term. And Mrs. Clinton was actually the host of that event. So I had a chance for the first time in my life to sit down with Mrs. Clinton. She was very charming. Of course, it's the holiday season here, so everybody's in a pretty good mood. My guess is now that we're separate, she's probably back referring to me as some type of Nazi. But it was a fun lunch.
Excellent. Glad to hear it, Mick Mulvaney. And again, a very Merry Christmas. Thank you, and we will see you in 2024. Now, in a few moments, we're going to talk to John Fund about how the Democrats are looking to reset in the new year. But first, 'tis the season for giving, sorry. Remember disgraced New York Congressman George Santos? Well, he's back, and he's selling himself on the internet. No, not like that. but maybe close. Consider a subscription to his new Twitter feed for the incorrigible political junkie in your life. Have a look at this.
Hey all, George Santos here. My subscriptions are now open on X. Don't miss out on the piping hot tea for just $7 a month. You're going to go nuts with what's coming your way. Hey, Congress people, beware. He'll have no fury like a scorned. Bye.
I tell you what, I think I'll keep my $7, Jorge. John Fund, after the break. Hey everybody, welcome back to the U.S. Report, a super duper end of year Christmas, Hanukkah, Festivus, New Year's edition for you tonight. And here's a 2024 prediction for you that you can take to the bank. As the November election approaches, the predictions about what will happen if Donald Trump comes to power again will get ever and ever more unhinged. In fact, they've already started. Allow me to present a mashup of just a few of the most crazy, over-the-top predictions we've seen yet for a second Trump term. Take it away.
What would a second Donald Trump term look like?
Well, he cannot be the next president because if he is...
You can't imagine the things that he's going to do. Mexico, Canada. We can't go to Canada because eventually Canada will become annexed to America.
And shoot visitors to the White House. Yeah, that means he can shoot the First Lady.
We're going to see violence, the likes of which we didn't even see on January 6th.
You think that's bad? It gets so much worse.
Illegal to run against him, to throw his opponents in jail, to shut down the media.
He will make himself into the Fuhrer, and he will make everybody raise their hand and salute him.
Using martial law against the American people.
Terminate the Constitution.
To rewrite the Constitution.
Create mass internment camps.
Throw everyone into Gitmo.
Might be sent to jail, or their rights might be suppressed, especially minority groups in society.
You might have any number of things happen to you and your family.
Every one of us, our freedom, our liberty, none of us is safe.
I don't know. I still don't think they've gotten hysterical enough. I mean, no one has yet mentioned Hitler by name, or even Mussolini.
Assassinate generals.
Ordering troops to attack American citizens.
Trump's very well-armed and extremist base will try to kill people.
He's going to basically burn the house down.
He will unravel the institutions of our democracy.
Draw similarities between Mussolini and Hitler.
Adolf Hitler and Benito Mussolini.
Makes Donald Trump even more dangerous.
Are you listening? Democracy is at stake.
The end of democracy. Yeah.
I think that could be the end of our democracy.
But democracy is dead if Trump is reelected.
Pretty funny definition of democracy these guys have. It only exists if you vote the way they tell you to. Let's get into it with my next guest. Joining me now is political journalist John Fund. John, President Biden's political standing is at its weakest point of his presidency. A new Wall Street Journal poll finds with voters giving him his lowest job performance marks and favoring Donald Trump for the first time in a head-to-head test of the likely 2024 presidential matchup. More bad news for Biden, but can it get any worse?
It just did this morning, James. The Pew Research Center, which is one of the most respected polls in America, found Biden's popularity falling to 33%. That is down 9 points since the beginning of the year. And it's even worse among some groups. Only 61% of Democrats approve of his performance. Among blacks, it's only 52%. Among Hispanics, it is cratered at 33%. If you ask people if they have confidence in Biden on the economy, that's at 36%. If you go and ask which party do you have the most confidence in to govern the country, Republicans are taking the lead now by 5 points. This is such a disaster, and this is across so many different polls, that the prediction that you and I have talked about for weeks and months is looming ever larger. The Democratic Party has got to find a way, if it wants to remain in power, to dump Joe Biden. And if they really are lucky, dump Kamala Harris, too, at the same time.
Well, and these numbers, you just mentioned a bunch of them, but I want to throw some more at you. The latest Bloomberg polling numbers shows Trump leading in key swing states. Arizona by 4, Georgia by 6, Michigan by 4, Nevada by 3, North Carolina by 9, Pennsylvania 2, and Wisconsin by 4. So this also would seem to cut against that kind of narrative that Democrats had been putting out there, that they were going to cope with it by, well, look, there's all these states, it's a state-by-state thing, not a national race. But that falls apart, too, now, doesn't it?
Well, it seems that the American people are very divided, but increasingly they're coalescing around one point of view. If you're a liberal, a conservative, if you're black, if you're white, you have less confidence in Joe Biden. And in fact, the one core constituency that he has held on to until now has been people with postgraduate degrees. Most people, you think of doctors and lawyers as postgraduate degrees, but actually we have more sociologists and gender studies, PhDs, and, like Dr. Jill, a doctorate of education in the White House. It's a lot more postgraduate degrees in those categories. So the postgraduate community, for the first time in this Pew Research poll, only 48% approve of Biden's performance. I am gobsmacked.
Well, but those 52% of dissatisfied postgraduate degree holders, they're not going to go to Trump either. So where does that then put the general election? They're going to stay home. That's what I'm saying. So do you wind up with a very low turnout election where Trump gets over the line, but it's because, the whole Biden camp just simply stayed home and they couldn't bring themselves to vote for somebody else?
Well, part of that hinges on what kind of a campaign it is. If it's as vicious and nasty as some people predict, there are a lot of people who may simply give up in exhaustion. On the other hand, if Joe Biden agrees to debates, and that's a big question mark because he certainly spurned any debates in the Democratic primaries, if he agrees to debates, that could energize turnout. The economy, if the economy gets better, that might lower turnout. If the economy gets worse, people might be very angry and want to make their opinions felt.
Well, so on that whole question of the economy, we're starting to see some positive signs around interest rates, and yet at the same time, the dream of owning a home, and I think that's the most interesting thing here, because that middle-class compact, which is what politicians have relied on for decades, ever since World War II, that's slipping away, and the monthly average mortgage repayments are now double what they were at the start of the Biden administration. I mean, it would seem to me that most people probably aren't too involved with the policies and the politics one way or the other, but they know that they're hurting, and the things that they were promised feel like they've been taken away from them. Is that where the mood of the country is going?
The Biden administration made a fatal miscalculation. They thought they could sell the American people on, okay, we had some inflation, but we brought it back down. What they forget is this. Over 2/3 of Americans are young enough. They have absolutely no memory of the last time inflation was raging through the economy in the 1980s. They have always lived with stable prices, more or less. So suddenly prices spiked and everything went up. Gasoline, electricity, used cars, housing, mortgage rates. Well, their perception, and I've talked to many of them, and polls bear this out, their perception is, well, after inflation, prices should go back to before the inflation. In other words, back to 2019 or 2020. Of course, that's not going to happen. That's not how inflation works. We're not going to have deflation. Fed won't do that. So that's why people are so dissatisfied. So when you see mortgage rates going up 90%, this is an event that they have never experienced in their lifetimes. And they're confused and perplexed and angry.
John Fund, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us throughout the year, and we'll see you in 2024. All the best. Now, stick around because in a moment, breaking news from the world of comedy. Saturday Night Live is not funny. You knew that already. But you know what else is not funny? Drugs. Specifically, whatever drugs were consumed in creating this very special Jill Biden White House Christmas video. the hell is going on there? I got nothing. Except for this little fact. Not even Christmas escapes the clutches of the woke in the Biden administration because, according to multiple reports, the dance troupe behind that little performance you saw is an outfit called Dorrance Dance, which, you guessed it, promotes explicitly Marxist organizations like Black Lives Matters, and its founder regularly talks about how white supremacy and racism and colonialism are deeply embedded in American culture. Well, gosh, what a holly jolly time, hey? And it fits in with a pattern because, well, let's just say that when it comes to holidays, the Biden White House has a bit of form for weirdness. Sarah Gonzalez, after the break. Welcome back to the program. Let's check in on the latest lefty lunacy headlines with Blaze TV host Sarah Gonzalez. Sarah, thanks so much for coming on the program tonight. Now, Saturday Night Live is under fire after it took aim at last week's congressional hearing in which the presidents of three Ivy League universities put anti-Semitism in context, as they say. But let's have a look at SNL's take on this.
Now, I'm going to start screaming questions at these women like I'm Billy Eichner. Anti-Semitism, yay or nay?
I'm sorry, what?
Yes or no is calling for the genocide of Jews against the Code of Conduct for Harvard.
Well, it depends on the context.
What? That can't be your answer, you pen lady. Same question, yes or no?
Well, we are serious about stopping all forms of hatred, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia.
The second one, and my tea lady, chance to steal. And keep in mind, if you don't say yes, you're going to make me look good, which is really, really hard to do. So I'll ask you straight up. Do you think genocide is bad?
Could I submit an answer in writing at a later date?
Am I winning this hearing?
What was that here? Are they trying to be funny, or is this just some sort of, well, I don't know, it sounds almost sort of Soviet in the way that they're trying to craft the narrative to match the sort of the woke line here?
Yeah, you know, I don't talk about my age very often, but I will say I am old enough to remember when Saturday Night Live was actually funny. And what you just watched was not funny at all. I mean, imagine if they were going to mock this particular hearing, which I'm not sure I would mock, but if they were going to mock this particular hearing, imagine they could mock the people who think that it's totally fine to wipe out the existence of all Jewish people. I mean, and just imagine if we're going to poke fun at someone, wouldn't we want to poke fun at the people who literally want all Jews exterminated? But instead, we live in a woke, culture where you can only make fun of those who are trying to root out people like Hamas, people like, those who chant from the river to the sea, which obviously, if you've ever looked at a map, you would know what that actually means. So unfortunately, woke ideology has infiltrated so many different places, so many different institutions, obviously our higher education system, which is part of the main problem. But as you can see, unfortunately, woke ideology has infiltrated Saturday Night Live. And coincidentally, that's also the time that it became very unfunny.
Well, I was surprised just when I was alerted to this clip. I was surprised to hear that Saturday Night Live was still around because, like you, I remember the good old days when it was funny, and I tell you what, that ain't it. But let's move on to another bit of crazy sort of wokeisma, I guess you could say. Boston Mayor Michelle Wu, she's copping backlash after an invite concerning the Boston mayor's holiday party, specifically for, and I'm not quite sure what this means, electeds of color, was mistakenly sent by an aide to all members of the Boston City Council. Does this suggest that they were going to have a separate Christmas party just for non-white elected representatives?
It absolutely does suggest that. And in fact, they later admitted to it. And one of the council members, who was unelected of color, mind you, said that they didn't think that that was offensive at all, that like-minded individuals should be allowed to celebrate and gather together and celebrate different occasions. And I stopped and I thought, wait a second, did you just say that all Black people think the same? All Hispanic people think the same? I don't know. I feel like that's pretty racist. But unfortunately, we're living in an upside down world where you're just allowed to get away with that if you're a minority. Because can you imagine the backlash if it had been a white mayor who sent an email accidentally to some Black officials inviting only whites, a whites-only Christmas party? Can you just imagine the backlash there?
Well, yeah, and of course, it would never happen. I mean, but this is just this whole crazy thing. It's, if you know your history, well, Democrats in favor of segregation, who would have thunk it? I want to ask you, too, about this here, Sarah, because, with all of this talk about anti-Semitism, people keep saying, oh, no, we're just anti-Zionist, we're anti-Israel, we're anti what they're doing in Gaza. It doesn't have anything to do with Jewish people, except though they keep showing their true colors, because now they're going after Jerry Seinfeld, who is Jewish. Who knew? The comedian and actor had his show protested by hundreds of pro-Palestinian activists. Is this now the new norm for the left, that Jewish comedians, professionals, restaurants, all sorts of things, we've seen this? Is this now the new norm? Is anti-Semitism baked into the ideology?
Yeah, I think that it is. And I think that it's been rearing its ugly head for a really long time now here in America in the Democrat Party. And so often the Democrats kept trying to push it down and push it down and push it down and pretend like it didn't exist. And then after October 7th, they realized they couldn't pretend anymore. I mean, this is very frightening stuff. I think that this is going to be the new BLM, where you have all of these crazy mobs, these crazed mobs going to restaurants, in affluent neighborhoods and yelling at white people while they're eating dinner. In this case, of course, maybe yelling at Jewish people while they're eating dinner. I mean, this is really serious stuff. And the most frightening thing to me is that we're living at a time where we're not teaching history anymore. So people, this generation who's going through higher education system can't look at what's going on and go, hold on a second. This sounds eerily similar to something that happened a long time ago that was really disgusting in Germany, right? Like, they don't even have a reference point because they're not being taught real history. This is really scary stuff here going on. But you know what? I welcome the Democrats to continue to show their true colors and show who they really are and who they really associate with.
But I mean, Sarah, people have got to understand, too, that while the anti-Semitism is horrifying and horrific and terrible, the underlying ideology, which is one that's all about DEI and division and dividing people, as you said, BLM, it was after white people. This is after Jewish people. But everybody who doesn't fit on the right side of identity politics, everybody can be targeted by this now, can't they?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And unfortunately, we have created this system where there are a few people up at the top who know exactly what they're doing and they know how to create the chaos. And then what they rely on are a bunch of sheeps. Unfortunately, I'm sorry to say, many Americans here in America are actually sheeps who just regurgitate what they're fed by the mainstream media systems, by their favorite Democrat lawmakers. They just regurgitate it. And so that perpetuates it. And that's who you see out in the streets thinking that it's a good idea to go target Jerry Seinfeld because he posted an Instagram picture that said, "I stand with Israel." Of course he stands with Israel. He's a Jewish person. This should not be hard for anyone who's paying attention.
Well, I stand with Israel, and I'm a goy. Sarah Gonzalez, thank you so much. Merry Christmas, and we'll see you in the new year. Now, after the break, the U.S. report has found the gift for the hard-to-buy politics junkie on your Christmas list for both the ultra-MAGAs and the triggered never-Trumpers alike. But first, since it's Christmas, how about a trip down memory lane back to a simpler time when Hillary Clinton was not only running for the White House against Donald Trump, but even had something approaching a sense of humor, doing a spot with Zach Galifianakis. Have a look at this.
As secretary, how many words per minute could you type? And how does President Obama like his coffee? Like himself? Weak?
Zach, those are really out-of-date questions.
Fine, lose. Country goes. You're going to lead the Civil War?
No, I wouldn't take up arms. I think that might be a little extreme.
Oh, right, because you were saying before we were rolling that you wanted to take away everyone's guns. Very cool. Cool.
I really regret doing this.
What's going to be the #1 focus of your presidency?
Oh, Zach, it has to be the economy. We need more good jobs with rising incomes. We've got to make the economy work for everybody, not just those at the top.
We need to take a break. We just need to have a word from our sponsor. Okay.
Washington is broken. The truth is, too many politicians are totally controlled by special interests and lobbyists. We're going to make America great again. I'm Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
He approves the message.
Why would you play a commercial from my opponent in the middle of our interview?
He paid me in steaks. Well, this has been a lot of fun, Mrs. Clinton. We should stay in touch. What's the best way to reach you? Email?
Amazing stuff from back then, and Merry Christmas to this future president. Who was it? A special gift buyer's guide only in America? Next. And now, yes, it's time. Time for that most magnificent moment in the show. A little segment to cap things off. A bit we like to call Only in America. Well, are you having a hard time finding a gift for the hard-to-buy-for MAGA voters on your Christmas list? Or have you drawn the Office Trump fan in your Kris Kringle? Or, better yet, the Office Trump-hating progressive? Well, guess what? I've got a gift pick for all of them.
47 all-new stunning cards, and here is the best part. I'm doing 2 important things for my Trump collectors. For the first time, we're creating a real physical Trump card. Purchase 47 digital cards, and we'll mail you a beautiful trading card. It is an authentic piece of the suit I wore when I took that now famous mugshot, and it was a great suit, believe me, a really good suit. It's all cut up, and you're going to get a piece of it. I'll be autographing some of them. A true collector's item. This is something to give to your family, to your kids and grandchildren. With the purchase of 47 of the Trump digital trading cards, you will also be invited to join me for a gala dinner at my beautiful Mar-a-Lago, my home in Florida. You've perhaps heard of it.
It was a very good suit, a genuine piece of the true suit, folks. That's all the time we have for the show and for the year. Thanks for watching, and thanks to everybody involved in putting this show together every week. We've got a huge 2024 coming up, so keep tuning in to the U.S. Report. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year. See you in 2024. Bye-bye.